What if I told you there was an arcade game that took Pac-Man to the next level? And what if I told you that arcade game, like Donkey Kong and BurgerTime before it, got a Game Boy game that took that game to the next level? And what if I told you that Game Boy game, nostalgia be damned, might be an even better Pac-Man than Pac-Man? Would you believe me? Or would you play Lock and Chase and find out for yourself? You big jerk. I've never lied to you. Lock and Chase was originally released in 1981, the year after Pac-Man took the world by storm. Which is important because Lock and Chase was basically a Pac-Man clone. It did a few things differently, but the other 95% of Lock and Chase was pretty much identical to Pac-Man. So obviously it never had quite the same legacy. But that doesn't mean it was a bad game. And 9 years later, it came back to prove it. Like Highlander 2. Actually, the second Highlander was less good, so that's completely wrong. You know what? Kudos to Data East, too. And Data East doesn't always get kudos, but this time they deserve them. Whole box of them. This wasn't the only time they took one of their arcade games and made an even better version on the Game Boy. They did the same thing with BurgerTime, and they released BurgerTime Deluxe. That game's amazing. And it's the same story with Lock and Chase, only they took this one even further. New character designs, new gameplay elements. And actually, Highlander 2 has Virginia Madsen, who has Virginia Madsen's boots. The point stands. So you play as, I don't know, some guy. Hey, what if I told you Lolo and Lala had a cousin who robbed banks? Wouldn't believe that either, huh? Well, read it and weep. Or look at it and weep. Point is, look, you gotta start trusting me on these things. You're Lolo's vagrant cousin, Lulu, let's assume. Your objective is to rob these fuckers blind. So instead of Pac-Man, it's like Pac-Snatch. Boy, that sounds awful. The pellets are now coins, the fruits are now gems, and the ghosts are now guards. Take everything you see, you move on to the next bank, you do the same thing. Because Lulu has balls. The irony being, he is himself a ball. So why is this version better than the original one? Well, the most obvious reason is the presentation. This game looks way better than the original. I mean, you could say the same thing for BurgerTime Deluxe, but the difference is definitely more pronounced with Lock and Chase. It's just a huge jump forward from the arcade version, especially in terms of the characters, which have all new looks on the Game Boy. And fittingly, it gives the game more character. It's cool how expressive you can make a character that only has eyeballs, and Lock and Chase does that. It's a real improvement. Now, of course, the other major difference is the levels. This is a much bigger Lock and Chase than before. Almost 40 levels in total. And that's one of the reasons this game compares favorably to Pac-Man. The levels are just constantly evolving and adding new gameplay elements, so the game never gets tired or stale. In fact, it gets more interesting as you progress. And as much as I love Pac-Man, I mean, you can see everything Pac-Man has to offer in a couple minutes. With this version of Lock and Chase, it progresses more like a platformer than an arcade game. You're going through walls, and then you're opening doors, then you're closing doors, and it's just a much deeper game than Pac-Man. And with all due respect to Pac, it's more interesting too. I think a lot of arcade games were a little too conservative on the NES. Most of them were just simple ports, and that was usually the best case scenario. But for some reason, once the Game Boy came around, it's like developers had a better understanding of how to bring these arcade classics onto these fancy new platforms. I mean, Lock and Chase was a fine arcade game, but Lock and Chase is an outstanding Game Boy game, thanks to a new look, new levels, and an awesome soundtrack, which it then wasted by continuing to steal shit. See, that takes balls. It's Lock and Chase for the original Game Boy. And a big thanks to Mark from Fresh Meadows, New York for sending it in. Hopefully you obtained it more honorably.